Hello, I'm Professor Fred Long. I'd like to welcome you to another installment of Greek Matters. Today I'd like to look at a verse that I've grown to really appreciate. It's 1 Peter 1:22. Now here I'm opening up to my Logos Bible software, and I have the Greek on the left side and English versions on the right. I've got a color coding schema that you've seen before if you've seen me in these videos. And basically the orange are pronouns, red are non-indicative moods, green are conjunctions and particles. Interesting that ook is here considered a particle. Adverbs are in blue, prepositions are in purple. And if you see a highlighted word, that is a verb that are found in the imperfect, perfect, or pluperfect tenses, and those tenses have some special significance. Well, what I want to do is look at the different English versions and just see that there's a lot of variety. Perhaps let's start with the NIV. Here's the 1984 edition. Now that you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth, so that you have a sincere love for your brethren, love one another deeply from the heart. Compare that with the 2011. There is not much difference. If we go to the Holman Christian Bible, we see that there's a different word order altogether. By obedience to the truth. And then you have having purified yourselves for sincere love of the brothers. Love one another earnestly from a pure heart. Now we're going to see that there's a textual variant here for this word for clean or pure. We will discuss that a little bit. Now look at the New Living Translation. You were cleansed from your sins when you obeyed the truth. So now you must show sincere love to each other as brothers and sisters, period. Love each other deeply with all your heart. Well, it becomes a little bit confusing when you look at these different English translations. Is there one sentence here? Are there two sentences? How do we best understand the underlying Greek text? Well, I like to use the NASB, not that it's the perfect translation at all, but just because I have a more likely a chance to understand what the underlying Greek text is. Of course, it's always best to look directly at the Greek. Here they translate it, since you have in obedience to the truth purified your souls for a sincere love of the brethren, fervently love one another from the heart. Well, let's begin. I'd like to begin by just asking you, what is the main sentence in this verse? There's a lot going on here. We see several prepositions, 3, and we can look at the corresponding Greek text. I have the Nestle-Aland 28th edition here. The main sentence is actually found right here. That's the main sentence with subject, verb, and direct object. And it's simply love one another. Now, the subject is implied. It's an implied you, and it's a you plural. So you all love one another, and then it has a qualifier, from a clean heart. Okay, so everything else besides love one another is a modifier. And so we don't have two different sentences here as we saw in the New Living Translation. Rather, we have one sentence with a complex of ideas. And I want to unpack those ideas by doing some semantic diagramming and discussing the meaning. So my Word document, I've already copied and pasted in my Greek text. What I'm going to do is isolate the main sentence, and there it is. Love one another. Now what's significant about this is that it involves a reciprocal pronoun, which is fronted, probably for a little bit more stress. And this reciprocal pronoun indicates something that believers are to be doing with one another. And that's important because love is not just a one-way street. Even though it may call for us to act sacrificially and alone at times, the goal for Christian community is a mutual love where we're giving and then being given to and loved also. And so we need to remember that it's a two-way reciprocal love that we're called to. Now the aorist tense here is a default. It doesn't really indicate anything about the kind of action, how repetitive this might be or whatnot. It rather views the action as a whole. But I just want to comment on that. You always want to look at the tense, particularly with non-indicative moods. Now, I'm going to align this into its verbal zone, and up above you can see zones that you can place verse elements or constituents into. Now, any conjunctions that are initial and coordinating I put to the far left, then subjects if they're present, then verbs, and then complements, or what I call what we could call direct objects. So allelus is a direct object, and so I'm just going to line it right there in this zone. Just imagine it's an imaginary zone. That is the main sentence. Everything else is a modifier, and the key to exegesis, the key to good use of Greek, is careful observation of the main sentence elements and then the modifiers. Often the modifiers carry a lot of important nuance and significance. Obviously the command to love one another, that's key. That's made the main sentence. But in the modifiers we get some very important qualification, and I want to show that. Now first we have this adverb, which is actually last in this sentence, ektenos, and this means unceasingly, fervently. And so this is an adverb that really ramps up, ratchets up the kind of love and the intensity and eagerness of the love that believers are to share with one another. So we know that love is important. This adverb really helps to stress that in for us. Now, the other thing, we have another modifier that is in a preposition, and that is this prepositional phrase ekatharos kardias. And so I'm going to place that also above the verb, and basically what's happening is that these modifiers are placed above or below, depending on where they may be found, what they modify, and they indent them 3 spaces over. So from a clean heart is indicating a mode out of which we're commanded to love one another eagerly and fervently. Now, how important is it to have a clean heart? It's extremely important, and as we'll see in just a moment. Now, I want to pause here and just go back to this textual variant here. There are some manuscripts that have a different reading here. In fact, some manuscripts simply have kardias. So they say simply from the heart. But then others have added or have clean as a modifier. Now in the UBS text, 28th edition, this rhombus indicates, this diamond indicates that the textual variant reading is seen as equal to the variant in the apparatus. In other words, it's a very tough call. Which is the original reading? You can make sense of it both ways. Okay, so whether this is from a heart or a clean heart, it's still from the heart. And we're going to see, though, that this idea of cleanness is going to be spoken to, will have already been spoken to in the previous part of the verse. And so let's look at that next, and we'll go back to my semantic diagram. So here we have the fronted part of the sentence. Literally, it's the souls of you having been sanctified, or having sanctified. And so this is a participle. I would classify this as a circumstantial participle, and I'm moving it over here because it's also modifying the verb. And it's nominative case, which means it goes back to the subjects, having sanctified, and then we have it has its own direct objects, your souls. So this is something that provides an important framework for loving. That is, as we are called to love one another, an important framework that even allows that to occur, perhaps, is in fact the sanctification of our souls. And so this is something that believers are expected to do and need to do in order for love to be possible, is to have a sanctified soul. So sanctifying your souls, and this then allows for a clean heart, which then allows for an optimal environment or context for us to love one another. Now this is so important because we're often living in a society that wants to keep us and make us unholy. And to the extent that it can do so, the extent that the world impinges on us and makes us unholy, it actually impedes our ability to love one another. And I think the reason why is because if we're not holy, if we're not pure, made pure and sanctified, we're going to be seeing people as means to our ends, selfishly. But if we're sanctified, we're going to be able to see them for people for what they are, and that is as part of God's creation and valuable, such that we can love them. In other words, we'll be able to relate to people not in a way that we're trying to get something back from them, but from a clean heart, where we're not loving with any strings attached. So the sanctification of our souls allows for a clean heart, which then allows for true love, a love for one another. Now, to come back to this participle clause, this pre-nuclear, it's pre-nuclear main verb, it's pre-placed, this provides a framework, an important framework that allows for this to occur. Well, this is itself modified by prepositional phrases. And so let's look at these. Having been sanctified in the obedience of the truth. Now, what does that mean? Well, this is providing the means by which sanctification occurs. So a lot of times we might think, God, I want you just to sanctify me. Will you just come down right now and do it? Well, sometimes he can do that. He can work miraculously in our hearts, but a lot of the times the sanctification occurs as we're obedient. Now, it's important that there's a qualifier here. It's not just any obedience, because you could be a part of a cult. You could be a part of any kind of group, and that group might tell you to do stuff and you can act obediently. That may not sanctify you. Notice that Peter here says obedience of the truth. This is a good example of what's called an objective genitive. And this is like the object of the verbal idea of obedience. We could think of it as meaning by obeying the truth. That is what will sanctify one's heart, is living in obedience to the truth that God has revealed in Jesus. And that's what Peter here is writing about, is the truth, so that people can be obedient to it, have sanctified souls, and then love one another from the heart. So this is really the means by which the sanctification occurs, obedience to the truth. And I didn't mention it before, but this perfect tense of verb form is really significant. It highlights the importance of this sanctification. Just to go back and look at this verb stem, it's from agnizo. Agnizo has a causative stem on it. That izo ending is causative. So it's involved in making something holy and pure, and that's what this verb is speaking to. All right, now even here we have another prepositional phrase. So having sanctified your souls by obeying the truth for a sincere brotherly love. This would then seem to be the purpose of sanctification, is an unhypocritical or sincere brotherly love. Philadelphia, obviously you probably have heard of that word, Philadelphia, brotherly love. And then here we have a really interesting adjective which is formed from the word that we get hypocrite from, upokriton, with an alpha privative on the front which negates it. So what was hypocritical, when you put the alpha privative on the front, it becomes unhypocritical. This is often translated as sincere. And what this hypocritical idea gets to, though, is that a hypocrite was actually an actor, someone who put on a mask. And so the kind of brotherly love here that's called for is one in which we're true to our faces. We are true to ourselves and therefore are able to relate truly to one another in an unhypocritical way. So this is really the goal of the sanctification that comes by way of obeying the truth. And so then we come back to the main sentence. From a clean heart, love one another fervently. And so this is an amazing verse here. It really gets to the heart of the Christian faith. We're called to love one another. And here it connects some dots for us, though. It connects why holiness is important. Sanctification and having a pure heart provides the context out of which we're able to truly love people. And so this verse packs a lot of content into it in a very important way. Now, how is this even possible? How are we able to be obedient? How are we able to be sanctified by obedience to the truth? Well, if we look at the context, we're not done. This verse actually continues in verse 23, and you can see there's no punctuation here, and we have a participle. Now this is a post-positioned participle, which has to do, it means being born again. And notice that it's stressed. It's in the perfect tense, which stresses it. It's from the verb anagenao. So having been born again, and this is what allows all of this to take place. And this being born again comes from the Word of God, the Word of the living God, which endures forever. Well, thank you for joining me in this edition of Greek Matters. I hope to see you next time.